Hey John, how's it going on what looks like a rainy day in South Korea?
Yes. How you doing, Shailesh? Yeah, it's monsoon season here in South Korea, which occurs pretty much every July on schedule, and most days are quite rainy for weeks on end.
Awesome. And John, you've spent more than 2 decades in the CBP and then you moved to South Korea. So first tell us how that experience has been post-retirement. What have you been up to and how are things going?
Great, yeah. So, well, first, it was actually well over 3 decades with CBP. I don't want to date myself, but yeah, I started with the old U.S. Customs Service in 1989. So, and I retired in 2024, and then came out here in actually July of that year. So it's been 2 years now. I've been in Seoul, South Korea, working for Kim Chang law firm in their customs practice, and it's definitely been eye-opening to be on the private sector side. Quite a lot of things that are different, but it's definitely been interesting.
Okay. Tell us what is different.
Well, when you're on the government side, it's just the perspective of being the regulator, and whether it's you're in an enforcement type of posture, depending on the job, or you are creating policy or helping Capitol Hill work on trade legislation, or trying to modernize, in my case, CBP's cargo computer system. It's just really that public facing, get the mission done type of stance. But on the private side, you're helping companies in some cases survive, especially in today's atmosphere of very, very volatile tariffs and changes in policy. So you really get to see how companies kind of get to move through these very, very interesting times and whole new perspective.
Got it. And in your government career, you did spend some time as the area port director of SFO at San Francisco, and must have been an operationally pretty busy life back then. So, any stories that you can share from the time at the SFO port?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I was the port director there for almost 4 years, and it was a really great experience in that particular area of responsibility in San Francisco. And there's a few other ports for CBP that are similar. You do everything operationally that CBP does except manage a land border. So I had SFO International Airport. Pretty busy airport at that time. We got about 60 international arrivals every day. I had the Oakland Seaport, which is a top 10 size seaport in the United States, so all the maritime cargo. I had a FedEx hub, kind of a smaller FedEx hub in Oakland also, that would get a daily flight from China. Had a bunch of little baby airports around Northern California and Nevada and Utah. Just a very vibrant, kind of busy place for both customs missions, which, as you may be aware, CBP is responsible for both immigration and the customs mission. So I really got to learn the immigration side in that position, because I spent a lot of time at San Francisco International Airport, dealing with the passenger operations. So I really came from more of a traditional customs cargo kind of side. So it was a great opportunity for me to be able to learn the immigration side of the mission. So yeah, you just deal with everything that CBP does operationally. So it was quite a learning experience for me.
Awesome.
Or I'm sure I was.
Yeah. And John, just talking more about the operational side of things, there were a couple of super interesting projects that you did. One that came up was it like 7 priority trade issues that you had to sort out, and you also had to collaborate with a bunch of PGAs or the partner government agencies. Talk us through that. Like, what was the problem statement? How much time did you have to prepare? What was the team like, and what was the real challenge in getting through that, and how did you do it?
Yes. So the what we call the PTIs, as you know, the government is crazy about acronyms. So the priority trade initiatives, those were, as you say, just about 7 or so major trade issues that CBP and even the U.S. Customs Service before the events of 9/11 and the creation of DHS, these were high priority ideas or areas, I should say, that the customs always managed. However, in 2015, there was sort of a landmark piece of legislation called the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act of 2015. And that kind of codified the 7 priority trade initiatives in law. So it actually became a sort of a legal thing that CBP is sort of bound to enforce. And so, especially in my latter part of my CBP career, when I was executive director of the trade programs and then the deputy executive assistant commissioner of the Office of Trade, a big part of our responsibility was to manage those 7 PTIs, if you will. And they're very, very basic customs sort of concerns, especially for the United States. So you've got anti-dumping and countervailing duty, forced labor, which was a newer one, which also was the law was strengthened in that same piece of legislation, the TFTEA, the TFTEA. Intellectual property rights, which is protecting against counterfeits and whatnot. Revenue collection, which right now is massive. It's really the top priority of CBP on the trade side, is collecting all the tariffs. Import safety, and that's where, Shailesh, all of those participating government agencies come into play in that particular PTI, the import safety. So gosh, there's actually close to 50 federal agencies that have equities at the border. In other words, that have some management of commodities coming in. So it could be USDA, right? Agriculture, EPA, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms in the regulation of anything of a firearm type nature or munitions. Consumer Product Safety Commission looks after kids' toys and other items. Alcohol, tobacco, and tax and trade, what they call TTB, the group in Treasury that looks after all of the excise taxes on tobacco and alcohol. And then really what I might call the big dog is FDA, right? The Food and Drug Administration. They have a huge management of goods coming in on the safety side for both food and drugs and whatnot. So CBP really are the boots on the ground that enforce a lot of those agencies' laws, just because some of those agencies are quite small and they're not able to put people in the ports of entry. So CBP will look after their responsibilities. And then just to sort of wrap up the PTIs, 2 more: textiles and apparel, very, very politically sensitive commodity, importation of wearing apparel and textiles. And then finally, agriculture. So they still remain. They're in law, and those are very important issues for CBP. So it was very, very cool that I was able to work with all those different industries and help manage that.
Yeah, sounds like a huge thing. So essentially, what happened was these 7 trade issues became the law. And could I say that your job and your team's job was to ensure the law was being followed? Is that what, like, the enactment of it or the implementation of it was the operational work?
More or less, yeah. It in a sense, it was sort of, I use the legal term codifying, and again, I'm not a lawyer, but it was putting into law what the areas that CBP and our regulators, or rather our masters, I'll say, on Capitol Hill, the U.S. Congress, feel that is the most important areas that CBP should sort of focus on. Doesn't mean they can't look at other areas, and they certainly do, but it just sort of framed, if you will, the 7 or so areas that are most important to have the U.S.'s border agency look after.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the PGAs themselves, because there's a huge variety there, how would you on the government side or operationally on the ground know which documents are required, what certifications are required? Like it's pretty challenging to remember all of that. So how did you all operationally ensure that nothing gets missed out, say when some food is being imported or when some clothes are being imported? Like there's probably a bunch of checklists, and how did it work?
Yeah. Well, a lot of the way it is effectively managed is CBP and even U.S. Customs Service before it organized itself or organizes itself around industry expertise. So you've got these folks called import specialists. That was actually the position I started my career in Port of Boston all those years ago. And what they do is they specialize in a certain line of merchandise. And now, interestingly, right around the time that Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act was made law, CBP created what's called Centers of Excellence and Expertise. So there are 10 of them, and they're industry-based, all around the major industries you could imagine, like wearing apparel and textiles, electronics, automotive and aerospace, agriculture and prepared products, all the food stuff, pharmaceuticals. So you've got 10 of these centers, and the folks in those centers, those import specialists, they are experts in all of that line of merchandise to include what are the participating government agency requirements. So they know you're importing beer from Japan. What is required? They know that. Or if you're importing, you name it, some type of electronic good that is regulated by the FCC, right? The Federal Communications Commission. They
Hmm.
know what documents. And by the way, everything is paper now. Rather, everything is not paper. Everything is electronic now. So
Yes.
when we say forms and documents, they're all essentially electronic now. But you still need this sort of form, or you may need a form for a certain commodity, and oftentimes a prior approval,
Hmm.
especially in the case of the Food and Drug Administration, for to import a certain commodity. So all that to say, the CBP team, both the import specialists and the CBP officers, they just get to know these commodities and these industries really, really well, and they're able to know what is required for each area. And it, as you say, it's such a diverse problem set.
Yeah, yeah. So if I were an importer, so I'm on the other side, and sure, and maybe let's just take the example of a new importer. Like I don't know a bunch of these things. What resources should I use? What type of people should I take assistance from? How do I ensure I'm not going to pay a penalty when I decide to import something?
Yeah. So I like to use the old adage, you get what you pay for. So the main interlocutor between an importer and a customs administration, not only in the United States, but just about anywhere, is your custom house broker, right? Your professional who is going to act on your behalf and file your entry paperwork, et cetera. So hiring a good customs broker really is critical. But moreover, as an importer in the United States, the importer is the legal entity that is liable for all duties, taxes, and fees, and everything that CBP regulates. So it really is on the importer to use what's known as reasonable care. That is a legal concept that is really a bedrock type of thing that they need to know to import, and it's found in the basic entry law, which is 19 USC 1484. And what reasonable care essentially says, really high level, is you've done your homework about knowing how to be compliant and what's required for your importations. In other words, you're not just winging it, or you're not certainly doing anything negligent or even fraudulent to avoid duties. You've done your homework, you've consulted with experts, you're keeping up to date on what's required. When importers use reasonable care, generally they tend to stay out of trouble. But again, hiring that good custom house broker is really critical.
Got it. Thanks. And suppose I want to hire a really good customs or an LCB broker. What are 3 or 4 things that I need to essentially ensure that they check so that I can confidently make that decision that they are really good and I wouldn't be in
Mm.
trouble later on?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, a lot of it is just comes down to your interpretation of how thorough they are in that first chat, that first interview, if you will, with them. Are they asking all the right questions about your commodities and what the classification of it might be, the value of the goods, hugely important. What are the terms of sale? They should be asking you a lot of very detailed questions about your business and what you intend to do in order to represent you correctly. But again, they're competitive, right? And it's a price sensitive type of service like anything else. But the cheapest is not always the best. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, yeah. We'll make that note. But essentially, from my side as an importer, the due diligence that I need to be doing is how thorough or how deep and detailed are the questions coming from the broker, because that tells me that they are thinking through it really well and ensuring that whenever that paperwork is filed, they know exactly what to ask of me or what should I submit back to them. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So that's amazing. I think it's an experience that would have shown you the complexities of implementing like 7 laws, so to speak, and also talking to so many agencies to ensure it just keeps going. I wanted to understand at the leadership level within government, like you were reporting to somebody, that person was probably reporting to someone else and goes all the way up. What kind of numbers did you guys track? Not just in terms of number of shipments and number of passengers, but any negative metrics, right? Like, did we let something go, which we realized later? Did we not penalize someone, but we should have, right? So talk about both like the positive metrics and the negatives, and what were those things that you felt you you really had to keep an eye on. So if some number was like at 2%, you just wanted to make sure it doesn't go above 5%, right?
Mm.
Like, what were some metrics, KPIs that at the government side you guys were very, very hawkish about noticing?
Yeah. That is such a great question. And it really is an answer that spans across many different types of challenges, be it mission focused on actually the collecting of duty, et cetera, and the facilitation of trade, but also hiring. Right. You'd get challenges from Congress in terms of a budget allocated to hire X number of whatever position that we were entitled to, whether it was import specialist or program officer or et cetera. Are you able to make your quota of hiring in a certain amount of time, and getting people on board into the government is a challenge for various reasons, not least of which is an extensive background investigation, and that really slows things up. So HR type of numbers, you had more of your, as you say, that the key performance indicator type number, like we want to increase the number of customs penalties that we issue, and by X percentage, and you'd have to look at to see can the field and can our centers of excellence and our ports of entry do that in a year's time. You would have areas, again, depending on the particular mission set. Forced labor, we want to issue X number of withhold release orders in this fiscal year, which will increase over last year by X number. Yeah, the numbers are all over CBP in terms of tracking, and it is something that, as a leader, again, whatever leadership position you are and however high you are, it's something that you're looking at, and it absolutely becomes part of your performance review at the end of every fiscal year. And being able to express the numbers in a positive way is important to a leader.
Those parts do seem very much like how it's in the private sector, getting budget for people, getting them onboarded fast enough, and then having a story for the metrics that you're presenting to the higher ups.
That's right. Absolutely.
Awesome. And let's talk about what's happened in the last, say, 4 to 5 years. What's your perspective on, say, the prior administration, like the changes that have happened now in this current administration? What challenges has it posed? What's your viewpoint, both for companies doing import and export and for folks in the government who are responsible to ensure that all these changes are implemented as well, right? So, for example, I've come across companies who are having a difficult time, say, with the CAPE system and the various changes that have happened. But just wanted to get your perspective on this current administration and during the administration. Like, what's your POV, given that you were in the government and now you're in the private sector?
Yeah, right. So, well, to state the obvious, it's been the last, say, 10 years really have been a sea change in international trade worldwide, led by what's going on in the United States. So from a personal perspective, I was there for the Trump 1.0 administration, where, you could tell the signals of change were coming in. In other words, we're going to do tariffs. We are going to be aggressively more protectionist. But they didn't have really the full backing of the Congress at that point. But everything sort of started at that point. And then the interesting thing, when President Biden came in, nothing changed. He kept all of the major sectoral tariffs, et cetera, that began under Trump 1.0, to include the Section 301 on China, the Section 232 of the steel and aluminum, and others as well. So nothing changed. And meanwhile, some of the newer initiatives for CBP were really kicking into gear, especially under Biden, which was the forced labor enforcement and the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, et cetera. Very, very novel new things for CBP to do. The only border agency on the planet that prevents goods made with forced labor from being admitted into the United States, into their country. Other countries are now starting to look at that, the EU, Canada, Mexico, but again, a whole new mission set. So then I retire in 2024. President Trump is reelected for Trump 2.0. And then, let's face it, it's game on. He had the full support of a unified Congress. This trade agenda kicked into high gear, and we saw stuff we never had seen before, reciprocal tariffs, et cetera. So a complete shift into what we call, tariff normal, if you will. It's enforcement it's collection of tariffs, less facilitation, just a different world. And so the timing was perhaps good for me in the sense of to come out on the private side when all this stuff was going on, and it's still going on. So it really is a busy time for us in this space. Anybody who's working in customs and trade, wherever you are, whether you're in the United States or you're out here in Asia, just a lot going on. And it's very, very interesting. But to even go 50,000 feet higher and sort of the arc of my whole career. And we sort of chatted about it before, Shailesh, is in the 80s, we were, and into the 90s and the early 2000s, it was really a march to free trade. It was quite a different atmosphere. 14 free trade agreements were negotiated for the United States, between roughly the time I began, when we had one free trade agreement with Israel, through NAFTA, and then all of the other free trade agreements, and then culminating in 2012, where I'm sitting now, the Korea U.S. free trade agreement, which is probably the last major one that the U.S. did. And then I like to kind of put it around that time that TFTEA was enacted, that Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act. That's when you started to see the shift. Yes, Obama was in office and not necessarily a big protectionist on his end, but that's when you had, for instance, forced labor enforcement really tightened up by law for CBP. Again, a type of barrier that was done at the time nowhere else on the planet, to actually make inadmissible goods made with forced labor. Just never happened. So quickly after that TFTEA, which actually really went into effect in 2016, President Trump was elected for Trump 1.0 in 17, and then again, further going towards protectionism. So a complete change in a span of 35 or 40 years. And quite fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. I was reading some of the early on statements at the WTO when it was formed, and how it talked about enabling free trade across the globe and reducing protectionism and all these duties and all of that. And now I was like, hey, wait, in principle, this was not supposed to happen. So why is it really happening? And it's like, it's extremely geopolitical in nature, but it is just fascinating to see the contrast with which WTO was formed and things that are happening right.
Couldn't agree more. And just one quick story. I tell it every now and then. I want to say about 1991 or 1992, I was kind of new to customs, right? Just on board for about 3 or 4 years at that point. And I remember being at Logan Airport in Boston with my colleague, a customs inspector, and we were examining cargo at the airport. And he was a bit of a kind of a, I won't call him an intellectual, but he was aware of geopolitical and trade type of issues even way back then. And I remember he told me, he's like, John, this GATT, at the time it was the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, prior to the enactment of the WTO in 1995. He's like, John, this GATT is going to be the end of our jobs. We're not going to have a job in 10 years. There'll be no duties to collect. And I was like, oh my God, really? But it's incredible how opposite that turned out to be.
Yeah.
But funny to remember that kind of story.
Yeah. And John, you spent most of your time in the US, but you also had the opportunity to be CBP Attaché at Singapore and a few other APAC countries. Perhaps that's what gave you a flavor of South Korea as well back then. How was that role? What did it really entail? What was your responsibility, still being associated with CBP but stationed in a different country?
Yes, that was an amazing opportunity. I was very lucky to get that, along with the port director job in San Francisco. What I did there, and what our CBP attachés do around the world, there's about 30 or so CBP attachés stationed all around the globe, and many of them covering a multiple area of responsibility, a multi-country area, which I did. So at the time, the Singapore attaché had the largest area of any of the attachés, because I actually had Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, some of the other smaller countries, Brunei, etc., Timor-Leste, but I also had Australia and New Zealand. So it was geographically the largest at the time. But the countries that I primarily work with were obviously Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia, because such trade-heavy countries. But yeah, what the attachés do is they work out of the embassy in the country, and they are the commissioner of customs, the commissioner of CBP's representative for that area of responsibility. And it's interesting because you have, in that position, you sort of have two masters. You report to the Commissioner of Customs, Commissioner of CBP back in DC, but you also report to the ambassador. So it's a unique sort of double hat that you have to sort of navigate, if you will, because there's different interests and different kind of things that Department of State's looking after, and obviously that CBP and DHS are looking after. So you have to manage both. But it was a great experience for me because again, the area was so trade heavy. So the Straits of Malacca, which is where Malaysia and Singapore are, I can't remember the percentage, but a huge percentage of maritime trade flows through there. I don't know if it's like 20% of world trade or maybe even more. It's such a strategic location. And that's why Singapore is for a tiny, tiny country, they really punch above their weight trade-wise in terms of, their seaport. I don't know how many million TEUs per year. It's huge. It's quite amazing. So like to contrast it in Oakland, I think Oakland currently has about 2.3 million what we call TEUs, tonnage equivalent units, like 20-foot equivalent of a 20-foot container, even though most containers are 40 feet. And Oakland is say, roughly the 9th or 10th largest seaport in the United States. Again, I don't have the figure, but Singapore has the ability to process somewhere, I think, north of like 65 million TEUs a year through their various ports. And they're in the process now of consolidating one massive seaport on the western side of the island called area called Tuas. And it's one of the biggest seaport projects, got to be in history. It's like a 50-year project. But they also have an extremely busy airport too. Changi Airport sees immense amounts of cargo flow through there along with passengers. And then of course Malaysia and Indonesia, very big manufacturing countries as well, and big seaports and airports. So it was really cool to be able to be on the ground there, work with the customs administration and immigration administrations of all three countries, see all that freight move through there, the manufacturing, and represent the United States. It was an awesome experience.
Thank you. All right. So we talked about the attaché's role and how that experience was. Let's shift tracks to what I think is a very important development over the last couple of years, which is the infusion of AI into everything that we know. How do you see the impact of that, not just in, say, trade compliance activities like classification, but also in end-to-end formless trade? You mentioned that now we have digital forms, but maybe with technology advancing, a lot of these pieces could be automated as long as the right data is there, right? So what's your take? Let's hear it both from the government side and now how you're seeing it on the private side.
Yep. So artificial intelligence absolutely has played or is starting to play, I'll say, an outsized role in international trade, just because it's a discipline that has huge amounts of data. I don't even know how to express it, Shailesh. It's the CBP collects more data than any agency in the United States in terms from the federal level. So just that alone, the amounts of data there and across the whole sphere of trade, all of that stuff floating out there in the ether of shipping documents and manifests and invoices and ownership documents, and my God, it's incredible. So having that capability to grab and make sense of that data, it's perfectly logical, and we're seeing it now. So just a couple of reflections on the activity of classifying merchandise in the harmonized tariff schedule. AI has been used in that area for a number of years, and it's getting more and more sophisticated. Is just giving the AI a commodity and say, what's the classification of this thing, and it will obviously we'll come back with a decent interpretation, hopefully. So yeah, having that ability, that capability is only going to grow without fail, I think, in the coming years. However, it's still totally not there yet in my mind from application of complex questions. And I'll tell you that in my time here on the private side, there's been more than a handful of occasions where the AI, for some certain complex questions that we fed it, was hallucinating, did not provide the right answer straight up for various reasons. And so in my mind, you can't completely rely on it for certain customs questions to include, origin rules, in some cases classification too, or other types of questions. You can't always really trust it yet. Maybe that's going to improve, but again, I've seen at least 3 to 4 times where we've either had clients come at us with like, "Hey, AI told me this," and it was not correct, whether it be Korean law or U.S. law, or where we're looking at stuff and then having actually looked at the regs and afterwards, or the tariff schedule, and found out conclusively that it just wasn't interpreting it correctly. So I think it's a growing time for it, and it likely will get better and better, but still in early days.
Got it. Got it. Fair point. And I think as we experience more and more, and feedback goes back to these platforms, tools, custom tools that are being created, I suppose we will see an improvement in the accuracy. There's this other piece that I wanted to check in with you, which is while AI is playing its part, where do you see in terms of technical maturity on the government side by country? So, for example, Singapore, I understand from a trade perspective, filling up of digital forms and just movement of that data from one system to the other is very, very mature and very, very advanced. So, what do you think they did differently? What would it take for other governments to do it? Do you see any, there do seem to be pros, but do you see cons of completely getting away with paper as well?
Yes, and that's a really good question. And I'll frame it around the creation of this thing called the ASEAN Single Window, because I did have some experience in that. And what the ASEAN Single Window is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which is 10 countries, embarked on a very ambitious project, and they actually completed it starting about close to 20 years ago, to link the customs systems in all 10 countries. So the customs systems could talk to each other and exchange certain documents, whether it be, certificate of origin, et cetera. What an ambitious project. And when it began, since ASEAN has such a diverse group of countries in their various developments, it sort of forced some of the lesser developed countries in that union to hurry along their creation of a customs computer system, because some of those countries literally did not have an automated system for customs. It was the old-fashioned paper in the custom house and stamps and all that stuff. So, good in one sense that it sort of forced the countries to hurry it along, but maybe a little quicker than they normally would have, and some shortcuts were made. And so good and bad, but kudos to ASEAN and the help it received from many sources, including the United States. The U.S. government put in quite a lot of resources to help it. But to do that there's really nothing like it on Earth that connects countries from a customs standpoint. The United States, at one point, I remember when I was in CBP, there was an idea that we would do a North American single window, connect Canada, Mexico, and US, and it never really got there. But to connect those 10 countries in Southeast Asia is quite impressive, and it is up and running, and it is being used by the governments and by the trade. So pretty cool. But just quickly on Singapore, in terms of being a real front runner on digitalization, yeah, they were way ahead of everybody. They created a single window way back in 1989, actually the year that I began my customs career. They created this TradeNet system, which brought together all of the agencies in Singapore that regulated trade, led by Singapore Customs, together on this system. Pretty amazing. And they've been obviously developing it year over year ever since. And it's quite sophisticated. So yeah, they've definitely been a pioneer in customs automation.
That's awesome. Making it super easy for importers and exporters and all the intermediaries, I suppose. John, one question I love to ask my guests is, what's a fascinating trade story that you would share with your grandkids, which might make them go, "Oh wow, I never imagined this would be possible"?
Man, gosh, there's so many. Well, one interesting one, I guess. When I was port director in San Francisco, we did a big enforcement initiative on counterfeit goods. And at the time, this was around 2000, the San Francisco Giants were in the World Series, and you had a rash of counterfeit T-shirts that were not official Major League Baseball T-shirts and caps and other items as well. And we, on behalf of MLB, and of course with their very, very enthusiastic support, we were able to make a big seizure of a lot of these knockoffs. And it made the San Francisco Chronicle, and I was in an article, and it was pretty cool, because at that time, again, the customs and trade stuff was a little bit less visible than it is today. And so that was a fun experience, being able to do that. And I'm also a huge baseball fan, so it was kind of a fun way to intersect both a personal thing and a professional thing. But yeah, no, there's so many other stories I could relate, but probably too many to mention. But I've had a very fascinating career.
Yeah, no, that's a fun one. And yeah, look, mom, I'm famous moment. That's amazing. Yeah. John, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge and all these fascinating stories. And thanks really for the contributions to global trade across an illustrious career. I think a lot of people, also me, did not really have an appreciation for how complex all of this is, both on the government side and on the private side. And as I've spoken to more folks and read more about it, I cannot say enough about how important your role and your team's role has been in just ensuring that we get things from all over the globe. So thank you so much for that.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Shailesh, and good luck with the podcast. I think it's important to tell these stories and kind of memorialize them. So I wish you luck with the podcast.
Yeah. Thank you so much, John. Take care and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.